Hey Joe, how's it going? We're back again with another podcast. How's it going in quarantine these days?
Great, Mike. Looking good in the new office over there. Yeah, it's been an interesting week. My wife and I were camping on our property near the foothills, and on our way there, we went back through country roads in South Carolina, and I was shocked to see how many people were roaming around farmers markets with no masks or anything else on. It was like the old times. Obviously, I stayed inside the car with the windows rolled up, just observing. But here in South Carolina, I think anything goes.
Hey, that's how you get to blaze your own trail there. So my kids coincidentally did the same thing. They decided to do some camping in the backyard with some friends. So we're not letting any of the kids inside, but so I kind of had a feeling it was a warm night that not. I was wondering how if all of them were going to stay in the tent, and some of them dispersed. We got a screened-in porch, so found one lucky guest be hanging out on the screened-in porch, and my son said he was in the tent for some sort of time, but I think he appreciated the air conditioning of our house. So I guess we got our two camping stories. And with that, we've got a special guest here today. We have Miss Lisa Tuttle. Would you mind introducing Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa, it's so great to have you on the podcast. I've gotten to know Lisa here in the Charlotte area through Ballantyne IT and many of the other networking groups that we all love to participate in. Lisa's been with SPX for, I think, 4+ years now as the CISO, and that is a particular topic of interest to many people on our podcast, especially given COVID-19 and all the crazy things that have crawled out of the woodwork. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and career as we get started here this morning?
Sure. Funny, you never know how your career is going to progress. And years ago, I would have never imagined it would end up in security. I actually started out my career in legal. And then I moved into more servers and networking for an amount of time. And then I got into the security, privacy, compliance space. And it's kind of interesting how all that earlier experience became very helpful. And now I, help negotiate contracts with customers. I'm working on, things that have a need to understand infrastructure. So it's been a really great path, and have enjoyed landing in this space that has changed dramatically since I got involved in it a lot of years ago.
Yeah, I imagine COVID-19 and work from home and challenges along those lines have presented some challenges and issues for you. Can you talk about the experience, being in the office and being forced to work from home? What kind of issues and challenges did you face during that transition?
Well, it was certainly a shift for our business. We're manufacturing, so we were not particularly progressive in the remote work options. And so it was very much, in a matter of a week, we went from pretty much all the administrative staff being in office to being remote. It actually worked pretty well. We laughed in IT saying, we like to manage things like projects and we're fairly risk averse. So we would have planned this out for months, so it would have gone perfectly. But, surprisingly enough, pulling everybody into Zoom over a matter of a week or two was a fairly easy effort. There were certainly some things we had to, course correct and help educate people along the way, but it's been a great acceptance. And we've really been able to prove that, the work keeps getting done regardless of where we're sitting.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting observation. I was talking with an individual this morning who decided to move to the mountain areas and is working remotely. And his company, prior to doing that, really didn't embrace this idea of working remotely. And all of a sudden, everybody has to work remotely, and now it's people are kind of embracing it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when whenever normal is, what happens to all those corporate spaces. Is that something that SPX is considering? Obviously not want to reveal any inside company secrets, but what's the perspective on kind of the return to normal, and will people continue to work from home?
I mean, I think there's definitely an intention of returning to office space. But I know they're reviewing remote work policies and considering, what options things that they might not have considered in the past. I think more than anything, it's probably going to affect travel, where we all felt we needed to travel and visit. We own a portfolio of operating companies, and that regular travel, Zoom is really proving that that cost could be avoided. And in a time when we're all thinking about tightening our belts, that could be a differentiator, even from a customer experience side. In some of our businesses, we do configure to order equipment, big things like transformers, and where they used to fly people in to look at the transformer, to go through the testing and all of that. Now we're leveraging, workstations on rolling carts with mounted cameras. The customers are still able to do their testing and configuration. And again, it's something that keeps us selling product and avoids cost for both us and the customer.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting, thing to watch as people kind of return to normal. I know with distribution and manufacturing, unless you have robots, those folks are going to have to go back to work. And
Yes.
I just can't imagine all of the prep you might have to do. Are you guys thinking about, sort of return to work? And I know companies are talking about having employees sign affidavits that, hey, I haven't been exposed, and taking people's temperature and that sort of thing. Are those things on the radar for you guys?
I've not heard so much on the administrative side on what we're doing, but we've been fortunate in that our businesses have been deemed essential. So the manufacturing has not shut down. They make transformers for, large buildings and hospitals and HVAC kind of equipment for commercial purposes. So they've implemented more shift work. They've implemented masks and gloves and temperature checks. So the manufacturing sites have very much already been in practice with, how they could manage getting enough people there to keep product going, and shifting people in terms of space and time to help improve that.
Shifting gears just a little bit, I'd like to go back to sort of the beginnings of your career and how you got into cyber. What was that spark? How did you find your way into the role?
Yeah, actually, I guess I don't want to date myself too much, but it was a time when people didn't have degrees in cybersecurity, and there was an opening on a team to manage a security team. And security looked very different, 20 years ago than what it looks now. I mean, it was more about account provisioning and, again, a very different space. And I just wanted a new opportunity, and, was fortunate. I'm somebody who's very much driven by learning. So I felt like, again, that was a nice way to get a different perspective on things, and just really pursued the security certifications. And then as privacy became a bigger deal, pursued those as well. So it was very much on the job training, but I felt, again, that the experience I had landed me perfectly into that space.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, and it's interesting too, you're a very successful female in a male-dominated industry. What have your experiences been in that regard? And I'm sure our listeners would enjoy hearing about some of those challenges along the way.
Sure. Well, I guess I would say I'm used to having been the only woman in the room. I got into security, got into it originally in IT and networking and server kind of support. It was all guys, but I don't know. I never really thought about it as a me versus them. I always felt like I brought maybe a different perspective, but I never felt I was treated differently. I definitely had to push myself to learn. I mean, when I first got into it, transitioning from legal into IT, because my degree's in business management, I bought Peter Norton's book on DOS. Big 500-page text, and I literally read that thing end to end. And I can't remember how many times I had to reread paragraphs to really, start grasping it. But I'm a person who can dig my heels in and just, force myself to learn and hands-on. And I always found, and have continued to find, IT people are willing to share their information. So I never felt like I was being treated as if I was stupid if I asked a question. I was always feeling like I was engaged and interested in what they were doing, and they were openly, sharing and learning, both ways.
That's awesome. As an industry, we need more females, and I know that just in general, IT has struggled to attract and retain leaders who are female for over many years. It used to be, like, I remember there was a fast rise. It seemed like back, and I'm older than you. I'm into my mid 60s now.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden it sort of tapered off, and I've never quite understood what happened and, why women sort of steered away from it. But I do see, great success in folks like yourself and Elizabeth Austin at Curvature. And so that's great to see. So, you've been now in this role at SPX now for several years. What are the biggest changes that you've seen over that period of time?
Great question. I think, when I came, and even in these last 4 years, there's been a lot of shift. The way the connectivity of our plants has really driven more interest in security by those businesses who felt, perhaps I don't really have to think about security. I'm off making equipment. And I also think compliance. We're seeing now a lot of our businesses deal with governmental agencies where NERC requirements, DoD requirements are really driving them to have to consider differently than they had in the past the needs, for security, and even the privacy regulations. California and others are introducing connected device legislation, and so again, it's creating collaboration perhaps where it didn't naturally exist even 4 years ago.
Yeah, IoT in particular, I know in California from my past life at Snap AV, presented some real interesting opportunities and challenges to make sure that compliance was met for all of those devices we were selling in that part of the world. When you think about cyber and you think about executives, I think it's often true that getting them to spend money on cyber is a real challenge. And I'd love to hear your comments around how you engage them, how you engage your board, and what are some of the challenges and hurdles you're facing in that area, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, great question. We definitely have been blessed in that we've got great CIO partnership and support for security. And so when I came in 4 years ago, we really looked at, do we have the right tools? Do we have the things that position us, for success? We're a small team. We're not one of the big banks in Charlotte. So we have to be pretty lean and mean in our management of the tools we're given. And so we were able to get, what I would consider a few strategic best of breed tools in place, some endpoint protection and response, sandboxing and malware analysis, even some machine learning tools that really started giving us that better holistic picture of what was happening. And as another kind of interesting change over time has been where we began on-prem, we've moved some of those solutions to the cloud because we're seeing great benefit in providing some of that off-network protection that typically was only available when you were connected via VPN or on site. Now as we're remote working and other things, those things are really playing out for us in a positive way. In addition, we SPX are in a acquisition mode. So over the last 2 years, we've acquired 5 companies. These technologies moving to the cloud allow us to provide more quicker protection for those new locations, where in the past we'd go through a process of network integration, and of course you're cautious in connecting networks. Right. Now we can say, you know what, we can deploy agents, we point you to those cloud protections, and we're already able to more proactively manage those new and somewhat unknown environments. As it speaks to the board, you'd asked about that. Yeah. We've seen a big shift there too. We used to present annually to the board. Now we're presenting quarterly. They've really, gotten more engaged in the conversation, and really, as much as security, it's more about risk. How are we going to move forward, because this world's moving fast and we have to stay competitive, but how are we going to do that in a, controlled way?
Lisa, yeah. From a legal perspective, you're one of the first guests that we have that has some of that background. So as you're kind of evaluating some of these things, where do you think that legal background gives you an advantage or a different perspective?
Yeah, I've always felt that was, really important in my career. I will say everywhere I've worked, I've had great partnerships with the attorneys. The attorneys are very used to negotiating, different kinds of contracts and work. And when they are presented with a, 10 or 20 page security addendum that really gets into the weeds of what can you do or not do, I've found there's a great, synergy there in being able to speak their language and just being able to read contracts. You spend, 10 years working in legal, it just becomes like a second language to you. as privacy laws would pass or PCI compliance or others, GDPR came along, understanding how to connect those dots so you can have a good conversation with your business, with your legal team on what does this really mean, because they don't understand the operational impact. And so I think, that's given me a nice opportunity to add value for them, be the translator between the technical teams on here's what we need to do, and business and legally, how could we approach this to be, that big word that's in all the legislation, what's reasonable.
Yeah. So how does that impact M&A, right? As if folks are looking at M&A, what are some of the things, if you had your consultant hat on, what are some of the things that are, that people should be looking at from a cybersecurity perspective? Are there certain different things that you have found over time that are important in evaluating a merger and acquisition based on your cybersecurity lens?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. A lot, probably the largest challenge that any business has, whether you're an acquisition or not, is legacy. Yeah. What are you inheriting that is inherently insecure but can't go away, quickly? So understanding what you're inheriting, have there been any breaches so far? What's their reliance upon third parties? That's, an eye-opening thing too, because again, you're always introducing not only perhaps that business, but these additional third parties who are, critical to their daily operations. What's their patching strategy? How effective are they in that? It's a risky business regardless, but those would be the areas we would put priority on.
Oh, that's great. Joe, you've had some mergers and acquisitions. Any questions for Lisa around those? I'm sure.
I think the cloud, as Lisa pointed out, makes some aspects of that a little bit easier to manage. I think it's incumbent on the company in question to really have a good game plan in terms of what systems survive and which ones don't. And I think where I've seen companies get in trouble in the past is where those decisions are delayed. And then you end up with legacy systems and all kinds of hidden problems. So it sounds like at SPX, you've got a really solid rock star game plan on that front, and don't have confusion about which systems are going to be leveraged down once the merger and acquisition is complete.
It's there's no perfect perfect path forward, but I think what we've seen over time is you began with a company who had a known set of perhaps legacy systems or ERPs or engineering packages, and you acquire 5 companies, and all of a sudden that portfolio has grown phenomenally. And having that strategic plan to say, okay, day one, we look like this, but how are we going to prioritize? Where can we standardize? How are we going to reduce this, this complexity and this administration that's going to be overwhelming?
Yeah, I think related to that too is when you're onboarding new people from these mergers and acquisitions, is their security awareness programs might be in a different state of maturity. And Absolutely. You often get, I'm sure you've experienced this, Lisa, where people are pushing back, like, why do I have to do this? Or why does my password have to be so long? Or, or why can't I just buy this software on my own? And
yes.
You're dealing with issues like that, I'm sure, in your M&A activities.
Yeah. We've really tried organizationally to put a lot of focus around single sign-on, because we know account management is very challenging, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. We've put a lot of focus on education, to your point. There's the annual things that we all have to take, but we're doing more with phishing campaigns. So we're doing multiples of those every year with the tool. And that's an area where the board's had a lot of interest as well, because the perimeter's fairly hard. Not that things couldn't be penetrated, but organizationally, people have put a lot of focus on the perimeter. Of course, phishing is the way for them to get inside. And so users who, don't put the right thought into whether they should click or not are definitely a risk. So we're actually going through right now escalation policies. If you click so many times, what are the repercussions going to be? Mandatory training, escalations to management. I think when you start getting that management buy-in or oversight, people start caring more. Because today, if you just click, 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 people don't really think there's a consequence. And certainly there's a lot of risk in that.
Yeah, and I think it helps that there's so much happening in everyday life around cybersecurity, where clickbait and true fake news, articles you read on, if you're a Facebook reader, you don't know if the articles are real or not. So I think people are becoming more sensitized to the phenomenon that we're all dealing with, especially with COVID and all the fake, CDC websites that are up there and that kind of craziness. Go back to the board. I'd be real curious to know what sorts of questions and what things are they interested in hearing about?
A lot on the phishing. So they're really wanting us to see, have focus on that. We're talking a lot about development, teams who focused again on more functionality around the way a tool operates or the way a piece of equipment's monitored. How do you introduce security into that life cycle? You're using open source and you're doing things. We have security tools for scanning code. How do we get them to embed that in their development and not see it as a bolt-on? So, trying to put more focus on development efforts. And then, just as things happen in your organization, they want to know, what kind of risks did we see over the last quarter and was there business impact? They don't necessarily care there were X number of vulnerabilities. They care about this thing happened. How did it impact the business? And then what's our plan to, avoid that? And are we staying true to our objectives we set for the year, the things where we were going to make security improvements in our program? How are we tracking on those objectives?
Well, that makes sense. A lot of people ask, what KPIs do you use, and what if you can over KPI executives, they'll get bored really quickly. What sorts of things are you guys measuring that they care about at that executive level?
So we really have just a two-page dashboard. We're not killing them with a lot of words. I remember when I first started doing this, our CEO telling me six bullets and 6 words per bullet. The story is really what you're sharing. Don't overwhelm them with a bunch of graphics and details and things that just take them off script. You want them to be listening to you. So we're going in again with a section of the dashboard where we talk about phishing. We talk about issues or business impact, and then we talk about those objectives we set for the year and how we're tracking.
I love the tip, 6 bullets and six words per bullet. I think that's really good advice. I see so many CISOs and cyber analysts who really want to, expose all the gory details about the SIM and what it saw. And most people don't know what a SIM is, and nor do they want to know.
Yes.
How do you introduce sort of new topics? You see a lot around zero trust, and you can't go buy zero trust. It's not a product. It's a philosophy or a design philosophy. How do you sort of take your executive teams through those sort of new things as they're evolving?
Well, I think, there's always the conversation before the conversation. So the more you socialize it before you get into those kind of settings, with the board, it's different because that's something that only happens and you only get that visibility at point in time. Similar to that, I get to present quarterly to our executive leadership team. So those are great opportunities to really have that deeper dive to help socialize. This is what we're thinking about, or this is where we think we have a gap. How do we think it could impact you operationally, or how do we think it could benefit you? Those become great conversations. Additionally, having that partnership with the CIO, he's having weekly or biweekly meetings with business presidents, so he can help, again, get them pre-educated or exposed to, we're thinking about this. So when we come into that group meeting, it's not as if it's the very first time they've maybe heard a concept.
Yeah, so just sort of get them ease them into it over time.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. You talked a little bit about cloud too. Curious to know what your take is on, how that's changing the resource and skill sets needed in order to manage these platforms. Since these things aren't all on-prem anymore, what sort of things are you seeing in terms of your own staff and IT in general?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another good point too, because we're actually going through some efforts right now around business continuity. It's one thing for devices or systems that are managed in your data center. It's another thing for those that are in the cloud. We may think we have a high availability scenario, but maybe we didn't pay for that as part of the agreement. So part of this exercise is pulling back out contracts and seeing, what is the recovery time? What is the availability? what do we actually have out there, because we don't have the same monitoring tools in place. We don't necessarily have the same skill set. We're seeing things, we've got some environments in Azure, some in AWS. There's a learning curve there for, the operational and security teams. And so we're trying to go through those, document, standard processes, how those would look and feel. But you're right. I mean, it's an ever-changing space as well. And our goal is to just try and have the same amount of governance that we would have in the internal environment. However, knowing that looks and feels probably different.
Yeah, I think that I'm a big cloud advocate, first of all, just so I want to say that. But I do think that cloud has created more complexity, especially for IT ops and cybersecurity and cyber ops, because the point you made is super valid. I think a lot of people think if you outsource it, your software as a service, you can sort of let go and assume that they're doing all the things that provider needs to do from a cyber standpoint. And I've had some interactions with companies recently where they've got a platform as a service where they've got a third party managing an application in the cloud. But they don't offer any cybersecurity controls or measures, and they're not paying for it. And they got caught off guard and have had some issues. So how has the cloud and how do you evaluate those cloud offerings sort of changed what your focus is from a cybersecurity standpoint?
Well, we kind of manage it through our PMO, Project Management Office process. So as we're bringing in new environments, there is, a design review, there's a security review, there's an operational review. Again, trying to get at least some level of oversight or governance to say, this is a gap, or, we think we're pretty well covered here. Definitely doesn't mean we're going to stop the business. As many organizations I'm sure experience, SaaS solutions are easy to go sign up for. And a lot of times we get pulled in, after the contract is signed. So it's a little bit of a catch up, just to understand what that environment could or couldn't support. We're big fans of standards. So what we're trying to tell the businesses is, hey, if you want to go to AWS, we have a great process already out there. We've got, the integration set up. If we can better control where they're going instead of back to that sprawl of having to manage a dozen environments, we could have 2 or 3. That would be a much better path for success for us.
It makes a ton of sense. I think just thinking about this sort of work from home environment we have right now, and how are you staying connected with your groups and your teams and your company, or how are people holding up during this whole cycle?
I mean, there's good and bad with everything, certainly. I think, we're doing a pretty good job of staying connected. So there are weekly all IT meetings, just for 30 minutes. How we doing? How we feeling? That, and then certainly your team meetings, your one-on-ones. No shortage of meetings. I think some people do better with the remote work than others. One of the things I've kind of liked to see is, as we're working through Zoom, I'm seeing a much more personal side of people. And I kind of appreciate that. I see their dog. I might see their kids. You see them with their ball cap on. It's sort of opening up a different insight into people that you didn't get when you were in the office. And so, I don't know, I'm a glass half full person. I'm trying to see the silver lining in, what's a very different environment for all of us today.
Well, it's kind of like with cell phones when they started. Like people started, who cares if it was noisy, not as good as your regular, phone that you had in your house or on your desk, right? So it is nice having some of these distractions. The dog's barking, kids in the background. It's almost people have become numb. Where before everybody was just super hypersensitive to it. But also even people just sharing their cameras. Personally, it probably like maybe 1 out of 4 would even actually use their cameras. Now people are willing to use their cameras. You just have to think about what's behind you. I've got my home office. There's a bathroom, and my younger ones, sometimes not as socially aware. So I put up a green screen. But so with that, what do you think is like the future of cybersecurity teams? Obviously, you were probably rolling around what your hey, the 20s, the roaring 20s are going to be like, right? But now with this whole COVID thing, just from here in Charlotte, right? What we've heard from other folks, your peers is, sometimes it's difficult to find the right talent in cybersecurity. But what is, based on all these different changes, what do you think the future of your cybersecurity teams will probably look like?
Mhm. Well, I'm hopeful that there can be more opportunity for even remote hires. You know, it's one thing to be remote work sitting in Charlotte, but is that really any different than somebody sitting in California? If we could have a larger pool, absolutely, that would be great, because it's hard to find candidates, a very competitive market. And we've proven we can be effective, you know, doing this work. I really think it's about the management team setting the goals and priorities, and those teams, you know, staying connected on what are my critical few, what are my, you know, highest priorities, being able to show you're adding value, delivering on the commitments we have with the business. And to your point, seeing people's faces, engage with your business in a different way. You know, we tend to hide behind emails. It's the world we've lived in for the last, you know, however many years. But email's a tricky business, as we know. And so getting people used to this idea of connecting on a video, how much more effective could we be in a 15-minute conversation versus a string of 30 emails where assumptions are made or where there may be confusion? We're really, as a leadership team and, you know, a technical team, trying to encourage those personal communications are still, you know, for many reasons, relationship building and productivity, a very good path forward.
You know, I've gotten to know people that I knew sort of on the surface here, even in the region, just through these sorts of calls. You know, in the past, when I'd get on video calls, I'd oftentimes not turn my video on. You feel self-conscious about it, but now it's if you don't turn it on, you're the exception, not the rule. And so I think more people are open to it. They're more aware of, you know, I see lots of creative virtual backgrounds now. Similar to the one
Like
I have. Yeah, I just have a TV and some counter space behind me, so there's no bathroom like in your situation in your house. So I do think that there are some big pluses that have come out of this, and I do think that people, you know, miss the human interaction, and I think people are longing. That would be the only thing that I think you know, will still be kind of a prevalent thing. I think people want to get together periodically, but I think there'll be more of a willingness to allow people to work from home and to hire remotely. I think it just broadens the whole hiring opportunity when you think about not limiting yourself to your specific, you know, zip code that you're in. You can hire great talent all over the globe. So I think that's a big plus that'll come out of this, and hopefully have lasting impact. The other big thing I see too is you know, the impact on the planet. You see satellite photos of Manhattan that you can now see the city much more clearly now that not so many cars are rolling around. So that's another, hopefully that lasts for a while, but I have maybe I'm pessimistic about it, but I think once people can start rolling again, they will.
Yeah,
but,
I agree.
Yeah. What other thoughts do you have in terms of, you know, kind of where IT is heading and where business is heading, and kind of your role within the cybersecurity world? What do you see coming ahead here in the near term?
I see greater collaboration with the business, for sure. You know, they're all being asked to digitally transform. That's, you know, the buzzword out there right now. And so what does that mean? Well, it could mean something very different, you know, to each business, but in effect, it tells us that IT is no longer just the back office nice to have. We're very much part of your growing your business as you want to become more customer facing, more, you know, whether it's e-commerce or customer relationship management, or even just aftermarket product sales, how all those things are going to be driven by data and technology. It's an exciting thing, you know, to sort of change us from just the ones who supported email and file and print to being able to move into that, you know, learning more about the businesses. I given a talk earlier in the year on connected device compliance, and the exercise the security team went through to talk to all our engineering teams across the businesses. We come in with a certain opinion or perspective, and when you talk, you learn so much from them, and it changes. The example I love to give, it stands out of my mind. One of our businesses makes obstruction lighting for marine, so you don't want to hit a buoy, you know, they put the lighting on that, and they have Coast Guard and other kinds of customers. And I was asking them, what's your biggest challenge in supporting when that lighting goes out? Why is it because there's a hurricane? Is it because some big sea creature hits it? You know, imagining all these things. And they said their biggest support calls are because birds poop on the lights and they have to go clean them. You know, I'm imagining something like this, and it's the most common, you know, everyday problem. And I just think, again, back to having that conversation, I went in with one perspective and I walked away with a completely different one.
So you need some drones, I guess, right? Some,
Exactly.
some
You know,
window washing drones.
In the security world, one of the most common consumer calls to security companies is a spider spun a web over the camera. Clear the camera. So, yeah, I think your observation around digital transformation are spot on, Lisa. I think I was talking to somebody yesterday, as a graduate student at Stanford in California. He was asking me about digital transformation, and usually when I hear that term, I just like start to fall asleep because I don't.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm so tired of that. But to me, digital transformation isn't an IT thing. You said it. It's a business thing, and it's how do business leaders begin to change their expectations of IT, and what expectations do they have of IT as a consequence? And it's really all around marketplace and serving customers. And I think your observations are spot on. I think that's where the energy on transformation has to happen. It has to. I think we in IT generally get it. And it's now I think the maturation of our executive teams that are now beginning to think about IT and technology differently. And it's scary out there because you don't know where a competitor is going to come from tomorrow. It seems like there's another upstart coming every day with new ideas that are threatening your marketplace. But it's a fun business. I've, like you, been around in IT for a long time and seen just an enormous amount of changes. Really appreciate having you on the podcast. We'll have to do it again here post COVID-19, just things really unfold for you. Any last minute thoughts or ideas that you might have as we close out our session today?
Well, one thing I guess I would just say in general, I think, you know, it's a huge opportunity for IT and security right now to become a partner to the business, not again, just that back support, but to become that partner, to be valued, to not be seen as the slow no group. You know, how do we take advantage of this? Because we're being given a huge opportunity to improve relationships and shape our businesses. When people go to the cloud, it's a frictionless, quick experience. You sign a contract, you're up, you're live. How do we as IT transform ourselves? You know, I don't know if I call it digital transformation for IT, but it's definitely a transformation in building that positive experience. You know, how do we, you know, pay it forward? Because we've had a great career and we've had a great past decade or more, but we have, like the businesses, have to change and look forward. And so I guess I'm always looking for those ways to pay it forward. How can I expand beyond my maybe written job description where I see a need? I've got a fresh idea. I've got a new perspective. I have maybe a good relationship with somebody. How can that be leveraged in a way that benefits the greater team?
We'll have you back on and we'll have a whole session just on that topic alone. I love that topic and I love that energy that you have around it. So it'd be fun to have that dialogue here in an upcoming podcast.
Anything you'd like to plug, Lisa, before we close?
One thing I've done, you know, everybody's got their own ways, you know, to share and pay it forward, but just look for those opportunities, because giving always is something that, you know, it helps people. It's very satisfying to you. I'm very passionate about animal charities. And so I've, you know, donated a lot of dog and cat food over the last few months. I also do pet painting. So if anybody ever wants a portrait of a pet, I'll commission a painting, and then I donate my fee to an animal shelter. So that's my way to give back.
Now, are you posting your work where we could take a look at it?
You know, people have told me I need a website. I've got a little bit on LinkedIn, but yeah, I'll have to figure out a way to get it out there.
Yeah, I did.
My son's an artist. Maybe Instagram. He's does just picture on Instagram so you can see this whole portfolio. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you're into that Instagram stuff, but it might be worth checking out too. Right?
Yep, I'm making a note. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for everything you do in the community. You're certainly an influencer and a steward in the cybersecurity here in Charlotte and nationally. So thanks for all that you do. We enjoyed having you on the show, and we look forward to talking to you soon. So be safe.
Thanks,
You as
Lisa.
well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care.